German pilots laughed at U.S. planes until the Thunderbolt turned the skies into hell.
April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The sky was a pale, icy blue, and the air so thin it burned the lungs even behind oxygen masks. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachin, a seasoned veteran of Jagdgeschwader 26, adjusted the straps of his flight harness and scanned the horizon. Below him, the patchwork fields of Normandy stretched like a green and brown chessboard, quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence about to unfold. Ahead, the silhouettes of American P-47 Thunderbolts struggled to gain altitude, their bulky fuselages awkward against the elegant sweep of the FW-190. Hermachin's lips curled into a smirk beneath his oxygen mask. The Thunderbolts looked almost comical to him, slow, ungainly, and lacking the nimble grace of German fighters. "Flying milk bottles," he muttered under his breath. He signaled his wingman, and the FW-190s surged forward, slicing through the thin air with practiced precision. To Hermachin and the other Luftwaffe veterans, the Americans were predictable, their tactics naive. He chuckled, confident the next engagement would be another demonstration of German aerial superiority. But Hermachin's confidence was misplaced. The Americans in these lumbering machines were about to redefine air combat entirely. Powered by the formidable Pratt Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine and armed with 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, the P-47 Thunderbolt was no ordinary fighter. It was a flying fortress, designed not for turning duels or climbing contests, but for high-speed diving attacks, devastating firepower, and unmatched durability. Every American pilot flying the Thunderbolt understood a simple rule: avoid prolonged dogfights, exploit speed, mass, and firepower, and survive where others would perish. Major Donald Billy, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, was among the first to understand the aircraft's true potential. Unlike the Luftwaffe pilots trained in traditional maneuvers, Billy emphasized boom and zoom tactics: climb high, dive with full throttle, unleash concentrated bursts of machine gun fire, and use the aircraft's mass and momentum to disengage. The Thunderbolt was industrial might incarnate, a plane built to survive punishment that would destroy any other fighter. In the hands of disciplined and well-trained pilots, it was a lethal predator. Initial encounters over France seemed to confirm German assumptions. The Thunderbolts were cumbersome in tight turns and slow to climb, especially compared to the FW-19s and BF-19s. Yet what stunned both sides was the aircraft's survivability. A P-47 could take hits that would have shredded almost any other fighter, yet pilots returned largely unscathed. The legend of Lieutenant Johnson's P-47, which limped back from a mission on May 4, 1943, with over 212 bullet holes, spread quickly. German pilots began to understand the terrifying resilience of these machines. They were not only durable, they were nearly unstoppable when flown correctly. By mid-1943, American pilots had learned to master the Thunderbolt's strengths. They routinely climbed to altitudes above 30,000 feet, beyond the effective reach of most German fighters, then plunged in steep dives, using gravity to build incredible speed. At 450 to 500 miles per hour, they would flatten into enemy formations, unleash a concentrated wall of lead, and climb back to safety. These attacks were sudden, brutal, and often devastatingly effective. The P-47 had become a nightmare from the skies, earning the nickname Flying Tank, not just for its armor, but for its ability to deliver annihilation and survive unscathed. The spring of 1944 saw the Thunderbolt emerge as the backbone of the Allied air effort. P-47s escorted heavily laden B-17 and B-24s deep into the heart of Germany, fending off Luftwaffe attacks with overwhelming firepower. Beyond escort duty, the Thunderbolts struck fear into German forces on the ground, strafing trains, armored columns, airfields, and supply depots. They were no longer just fighters. They were instruments of total aerial dominance. Even the introduction of revolutionary jet fighters like the Me-262 did not render them obsolete. Pilots such as John C. Meare and George Bostwick intercepted jets, demonstrating that a propeller-driven aircraft with superior dive speed, armor, and armament could still dictate the terms of engagement. The P-47's success was as much a product of American industrial might as pilot skill. Over 15,000 Thunderbolts were produced, each built with precision and reliability, while pilot training programs rapidly churned out skilled aviators, keeping losses sustainable. The Luftwaffe, increasingly crippled by shortages and attrition, could not replace pilots or machines quickly enough to challenge this relentless force. By 1945, the combination of durability, firepower, tactical innovation, and sheer production capacity had effectively neutralized Germany's ability to contest the skies. Stories from the pilots themselves reveal just how extraordinary the aircraft was. Lieutenant Frank Bostwick recounted strafing a German airfield in France, returning with his canopy riddled with flak and bullet holes, the engine smoking. Yet the P-47 had brought him home safely. Major Billy himself survived an engagement where 3 FW-190s had fired simultaneously, only to see the Thunderbolt's thick armor and self-sealing fuel tanks absorb the damage. These accounts became legendary, inspiring a generation of pilots who knew that in the P-47, survival was not just luck, it was engineering. What began as a seemingly awkward, laughable aircraft had, by the end of the war, become a symbol of raw, unrelenting American power. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as a joke and ended the war as a tool of annihilation, a testament to American ingenuity, tactical brilliance, and the terrifying efficiency of combining durability with overwhelming firepower. For the Luftwaffe, it was a bitter lesson. Experience and skill could be outmatched by machines designed not just to fly, but to endure, strike, and survive. In the calculus of war, the P-47 proved that the combination of industrial might, tactical innovation, and superior engineering could decisively shape the skies. By the time the smoke of war cleared over Europe, the Thunderbolt's legacy was undeniable. It had escorted thousands of bombers, decimated enemy infrastructure, and forced the Luftwaffe into retreat. Pilots on both sides came to respect the machine. For the Germans, it was a relentless adversary. For the Americans, a trusted companion in the skies. Hermichin, who had once laughed at the milk bottles, would later recall with grim humility that these aircraft had changed the rules of aerial warfare forever. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is not just the story of a plane, but the story of how innovation, strategy, and sheer industrial capacity can reshape the very nature of warfare. What began as an aircraft dismissed by its enemies as clumsy and awkward became, through ingenuity and relentless development, one of the most formidable weapons in the Allied arsenal. Its success lay not merely in its technical specifications, the massive R2800 engine, the 8.50 caliber machine guns, or its nearly indestructible airframe, but in the philosophy of its use. The Thunderbolt was a manifestation of a new way of thinking about air combat. It leveraged brute force, protection, and momentum over finesse, proving that victory in the skies required more than piloting skill alone. It required a complete understanding of the strengths of both men and machines. The P-47's impact was multidimensional. In the air, it redefined tactics, forcing a shift from classic turning dogfights to the boom and zoom approach, prioritizing altitude, speed, and concentrated firepower. On the ground, it became a terror, striking railways, convoys, and airfields with impunity, demonstrating that air superiority could directly shape the battlefield. Its presence demanded a strategic response, and even the Luftwaffe's best pilots found themselves challenged in ways they had never anticipated. Each encounter, each mission, revealed the terrifying combination of resilience and lethality that made the Thunderbolt almost unstoppable. Equally important was the industrial and logistical framework that supported the aircraft. Over 15,000 P-47s were produced, each one a meticulously engineered tool of war, supported by a vast network of training, maintenance, and supply. Where German forces struggled to replace pilots or machines, the Allies could rapidly replenish losses and sustain a high operational tempo. In this way, the Thunderbolt was as much a weapon of economic and logistical power as it was of aerial combat. It exemplified how strategy, production, and innovation could converge to produce overwhelming force, and in doing so, it rendered even highly skilled adversaries increasingly vulnerable. For the men who flew them, the Thunderbolt was both protector and partner. Pilots trusted it to survive what would have been fatal encounters in lesser aircraft. They relied on it to carry them into combat and bring them home, often battered but intact. This bond between man and machine became a central element of its success, illustrating that technology alone could not win wars, but technology combined with training, discipline, and courage could. By war's end, the P-47 had achieved something rare in military history. It transformed perceptions, tactics, and outcomes. It turned the skies over Europe into a domain dominated by American power, reshaped Luftwaffe strategies, and underscored a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Mastery of the battlefield comes not only from skill, courage, or even innovation alone, but from the seamless integration of all three. Where Oberleutnant Hermichin had once laughed at the milk bottles, by 1945 there was no laughter, only respect, fear, and the grudging acknowledgement that the P-47 Thunderbolt had, in every sense, rewritten the rules of air combat. Ultimately, the Thunderbolt's legacy endures as a testament to human ingenuity and industrial might. It proved that an aircraft, even one initially underestimated, could redefine an entire theater of war when paired with strategy, skill, and relentless determination. It was not just a machine. It was a turning point, a symbol of resilience, and a reminder that the combination of preparation, innovation, and courage can turn even the most unlikely tool into an instrument of triumph. For generations of pilots, historians, and enthusiasts, the P-47 remains a shining example of how technology and human will can converge to achieve something extraordinary. A flying tank that carried the weight of victory on its wings. July 2nd, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The pilot of the FW-190 had no warning until the sudden hail of bullets ripped through his fuselage, sending the German fighter into a tumbling descent toward the Sicilian fields below. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, just 22, from Brazil, Indiana, had accomplished what Luftwaffe commanders assumed impossible. An African-American pilot had just downed one of their elite planes. The black swastika insignia Hall had marked on his P-40 Warhawk That afternoon would become the first of 112 enemy aircraft destroyed by men the Germans would whisper about as Schwarzer Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdman. In Nazi ideology, black people were deemed subhuman, incapable of mastering machinery or showing courage. Nuremberg laws forbade marriages between Germans and Africans. Yet high above the Mediterranean, reality collided with prejudice, as 992 pilots trained at Tuskegee, Alabama, would systematically challenge both enemy aircraft and entrenched racist assumptions. The Luftwaffe pilots ascending to meet American bombers in 1943 had no idea they were about to encounter some of the most disciplined, motivated, and technically skilled aviators in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Men who had faced hurdles their white peers never knew, trained longer, harder, and carried not only the weight of national duty, but the responsibility of demonstrating a race's capability. The calculus of air combat would soon be written across Europe's skies: 15,000 sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and bomber escort loss rates far below comparable units. Numbers that forced even the most dogmatic Nazis to confront the failure of their racial dogma. The path to that first kill began far from combat in the segregated United States. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College released a report, Employment of Negro Manpower in War, stating, compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. Official military opinion claimed black soldiers lacked intelligence for technical roles or courage for leadership. Yet pioneers were already disproving this. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in World War I when America refused him. Bessie Coleman earned a pilot's license in Paris in 1921 after being barred from U.S. flight schools. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics trained dozens of black civilian pilots, proving aviation skill had no racial limits. Pressure for inclusion grew as war loomed. Civil rights leaders like Walter White, A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie pressed relentlessly for black participation in military aviation. Black newspapers, the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, and Baltimore Afro-American, challenged Roosevelt, asking how America could fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home. On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 cracked the door open. Senator Harry H. Schwartz mandated that the civilian pilot training program designate schools to train black pilots. Segregated, begrudging, but a start. When Roosevelt campaigned for a third term in 1940, he needed black votes. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black unit, an experiment to test whether black pilots could fight. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., son of America's first black general, took command in April 1943, leading 26 pilots to North Africa. Davis had endured 4 years of ostracism at West Point. Now he led men carrying not only their own hopes, but those of 13 million black Americans. The 99th reached Farjuna, Tunisia, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momyer, a commander openly skeptical of black pilots. He assigned them patrols over the Mediterranean, away from the action, expecting them to fail. Their first combat mission came June 2, 1943, an attack on Italian-controlled Pantelleria. German fighters appeared. The Tuskegee pilots held formation, shielding bombers. No losses occurred, but a lesson had been delivered. They would not break. July 2, 1943, changed everything. Hall flew his 8th mission, escorting B-25 bombers striking Castelvetrano. 2 FW-19s dived on the bombers. Hall recalled, "I turned between the fighters and bombers, fired a long burst, and saw my rounds hit the second plane. It fell and plunged into the ground. When he landed, the base erupted in celebration. Black ground crews finally witnessed proof. Their pilots could fight and win." Hall's victory marked the first aerial kill by an African American in U.S. military history. By January 1944, the 99th had 7 months of combat, yet Colonel Mommier recommended their removal for lack of aggressiveness. General Henry H. Arnold considered ending the experiment. Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids. 15 99th pilots, flying P-40s against superior FW-190s, downed 8 to 13 enemy aircraft in 2 days. Hall added 2 more kills, proving that, even with inferior planes, skill and discipline prevailed. A War Department review confirmed the 99th matched white units in performance. May 1944 brought transformation. The 332nd Fighter Group formed, combining the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd Squadrons, tasked with long-range bomber escort missions deep into Germany. At Ramitelli Airfield, Colonel Davis instructed, "Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." In June 1944, the unit adopted red markings, tails, noses, propellers, becoming instantly recognizable. Bomber crews, initially unaware they were black pilots, came to rely on them, calling them Red Tail Angels. July 18, 1944, tested them. 66 Mustangs rendezvoused with delayed bombers, only to encounter 100 Luftwaffe fighters. Despite fierce combat, 332nd pilots claimed 11 to 12 kills, losing only 3. Analysis confirmed they had prevented disaster, despite overwhelming odds. By March 1945, Luftwaffe fighters could no longer challenge Allied air dominance. Germany unleashed the Me-262 jet. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd engaged the world's first operational jets. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown and his comrades used superior tactics to shoot down 3 jets in one engagement, a feat unmatched by other American units. The Red Tails earned a Distinguished Unit citation. Not every encounter ended in victory. 32 pilots became POWs, revealing Nazi intelligence on the 332nd's operations. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson noted German knowledge of squadron details, yet interactions with white POWs highlighted the stark contrast with America's segregated military. German pilots nicknamed them Schwarze Vogelmenschen, while many Americans remained unaware of black pilots' existence. Victory came with cost. 66 pilots killed in action, 32 captured, 84 lost in training or non-combat missions. Achievements were vast: 112 aerial victories, 150 planes destroyed on the ground, 3 Me-262s, 950 vehicles and rail cars, 254 locomotives, numerous medals, including 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Every victory disproved prejudice. Tuskegee pilots had trained longer, endured higher attrition, and mastered inferior aircraft until the P-51 Mustang arrived, giving them unmatched range, speed, and firepower. Ground crews, fewer than 1,000 among 16,000 airmen, maintained these aircraft under primitive conditions, often under fire. Escorting bombers, Red Tails lost only 27 aircraft compared to an average 46 for other units. Their discipline, skill, and courage rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. The Tuskegee Airmen fought 3 wars, defeating the Luftwaffe, challenging Nazi racial ideology, and confronting American segregation. Recognition came slowly. Integration followed in 1948 under Truman, and Benjamin Davis became the first Black Air Force general in 1954. The Congressional Gold Medal arrived in 2007, decades after the fact. The Red Tails' legacy remains undeniable. Their victories, discipline, and courage shattered myths of racial inferiority. As Roscoe Brown reflected, "We didn't just fight the Germans, we fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all 3. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win battles, they transformed history. Mockery became respect, prejudice became recognition, and capability, proved color, was irrelevant." Celebrated as the Red Tails for their striking red-painted P-51 Mustangs and reportedly known to the German Luftwaffe as Schwarze Vogelmenschen, Black Birdmen, these courageous aviators destroyed 112 enemy aircraft while safeguarding countless American bombers over the skies of Europe. From First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall's historic first kill on July 2, 1943, at Castelvetrano, Sicily, to the astonishing feat of downing 3 German Me-262 jet fighters in a single engagement over Berlin on March 24, 1945. This detailed account chronicles how 992 Tuskegee-trained pilots overcame relentless prejudice, segregation, and doubt to achieve one of the most impressive combat records in military history. Operating with extraordinary discipline, technical skill, and courage, the 332nd Fighter Group maintained a bomber loss rate of just 27 aircraft, far below the 46-plane average of other units, and earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Their legacy not only dismantled myths of racial inferiority, but also helped pave the way for the integration of the U.S. military. Through determination, training, and unmatched bravery, the Tuskegee Airmen demonstrated that excellence in the skies transcends race, leaving an enduring impact on both military history and the fight for equality. October 14, 1943. More than 15,000 feet above the German city of Schweinfurt, a Luftwaffe pilot scribbled a quick note into his scuffed flight log. Another American heavy bomber destroyed. His 17th. Below him, a B-17 Flying Fortress tumbled in a wide, smoky arc toward the fields of Bavaria, its 4 engines coughing fire as tiny white specks, parachutes, drifted free. Through the framed glass of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the rest of the bomber stream fighting desperately to preserve their defensive box. 50 caliber tracers reached for the sky, but the German fighters had already vanished back into the sun. Air combat, in that moment of the war, was a harsh equation. Fighters chose when to strike. Fighters chose when to disappear. U.S. bombers, flying without escorts, were simply slow, armored targets with nowhere to hide. That day, 291 B-17s crossed into the heart of Germany to cripple the ball-bearing works at Schweinfurt, the lifeblood of German industry. At dusk, 60 would be missing entirely, and 17 more would limp home as mangled wrecks destined for the scrap line. German pilots jokingly compared it to a turkey shoot. For the United States 8th Air Force, it would forever be remembered as Black Thursday, one of the most tragic days in its history. Yet neither side realized that this moment of German dominance would soon collapse, and very quickly. By late 1943, Luftwaffe fighter leaders felt untouchable. Aces such as Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland and Walter Dahl had honed bomber interception into a cold, methodical craft. They dissected the American formation, a 3-dimensional fortress of 18 to 21 aircraft, and catalogued every weakness the US theory of mutual protection failed to address. In theory, each B-17 carried 13.50 caliber guns, able to defend any angle. In practice, there were fatal blind zones, limited ammunition, and human nerves that frayed under sustained attack. One Luftwaffe tactician, Egon Meyer, mastered the attack that terrified bomber crews most: the head-on approach. Diving from high 12 o'clock at more than 400 miles per hour, he fired a razor-short burst at cockpit and engines before streaking away faster than any turret could track. By October 1943, he had already destroyed 17 heavy bombers, each attack taking mere seconds from life to death. Statistics fueled German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg operation on August 17, 1943, U.S. forces lost nearly 1 out of every 6 aircraft sent. Strategic daylight bombing halted for weeks. When the operation resumed in October, the slaughter was even worse. 77 heavy bombers gone, over 600 Americans killed or captured in a single day. Then came the tactic known as the company front. 8 FW-19s thundering in abreast, overwhelming every gunner's aim. Under that kind of pressure, many Americans fired wildly into empty space. But the Luftwaffe's most powerful advantage was geography. U.S. fighters simply couldn't reach. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's primary high-altitude escort, could barely cross the German frontier before fuel forced it home. The P-38 Lightning reached farther, but its engines struggled at altitude in the bitter European winter. Allied escorts turned back, and the Luftwaffe struck with full fury. Luftwaffe pilots called that moment Die Goldene 20 Minuten, the golden 20 minutes, though it often stretched far longer. They would attack, land, refuel, climb back up, and attack again. Sometimes 4 times before the bombers escaped toward the Channel. Everything changed the moment a British idea collided with American manufacturing. In 1940, Britain urgently needed fighters. North American aviation offered them something new instead: a prototype built in an astonishing 120 days. The result was the Mustang. Early versions were fast but lost power above 15,000 feet, useless for bomber escort. Then a Rolls-Royce test pilot flew it, recognized its brilliance, and demanded a Merlin engine under the hood. What followed was one of the most important engineering marriages in military history. The Merlin-powered Mustang, the P-51B, was born. Faster, higher flying, sharper. Its laminar flow wing slipped through the air with unprecedented efficiency, allowing the Mustang to fly farther on less fuel than any fighter before it. And its sleek frame could carry drop tanks without dragging its performance into the dirt. With 2 108-gallon tanks slung beneath its wings, the P-51B could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. In November 1943, the 354th Fighter Group, soon called the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51Bs and immediately tested their reach. On December 13th, Mustangs were spotted deep over Germany, territory once considered untouchable. Luftwaffe pilots initially assumed they were P-47s that had lost their way. When the American fighters kept pushing eastward, confusion turned to panic. German controllers demanded confirmation. Are those Thunderbolts? Negative, new type, unidentified, still climbing. By the final days of 1943, one German commander returned from a failed interception, furious. His report was blunt. The air war has changed. There is no safe airspace. They can chase us home. March 4th, 1944. Berlin. Hermann Göring had sworn the capital would never suffer the humiliation of Allied fighters overhead. That morning, 660 US bombers appeared, surrounded by dozens of P-51s dancing like sharks around a wounded whale. The impossible had happened. Mustangs swept down from on high, tearing into the intercepting fighters before they could reach the bomber stream. The 4th Fighter Group claimed 15 victories that day and sent the rest running low on fuel, out of ammo, out of hope. American pilots felt empowered. The Mustang moved like a racer, fought like a brawler, and flew like an airliner. It could climb with a Messerschmitt, roll with a Focke-Wulf, and run from anything that turned the tide. Pilots endured 6-hour missions, strapped into oxygen masks in air cold enough to freeze tears solid. But they knew they could protect the bombers now. Luftwaffe leadership refused to believe what they were seeing. One famous quote, though likely exaggerated in retelling, expressed the shock. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Hermann Göring. The Reich's strategic assumptions shattered. Factories, training bases, and airfields once considered safe now required defense against strafing Mustangs, which dove from the sky to chew apart planes on the runway, fuel depots, and transport lines. Big Week, February 20th through 25th, 1944, sealed the Luftwaffe's fate. With full escort, bombers attacked the core of German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe lost hundreds of fighters, but worse, they bled away their veteran pilots. American losses could be replaced. German losses could not. Soon, US strategy turned ruthless. Seek the Luftwaffe and destroy it, on the ground if necessary. Fighter groups dropped from bomber altitude after the strike and ravaged airfields, trains, and anything that moved. Attrition became the grim judge of the war. German pilot fatalities skyrocketed into the thousands every month. Meanwhile, the US pilot pipeline poured fresh replacements into Europe. By June 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe could barely appear above the invasion beaches. Allied aircraft flew nearly 15,000 sorties. Germany managed barely 300. 2 lone German fighters over the Armada found themselves ignored, more curiosity than threat. As summer burned on, Allied fighters targeted oil, the true lifeblood of any air force. Successful strikes on synthetic fuel plants reduced German aviation fuel production to a trickle. Jets like the Me-262, marvels of engineering, sat grounded while Mustangs prowled overhead like wolves guarding the door. Veteran ace Johannes Steinhoff summarized the disaster clearly. "We had magnificent aircraft. We simply could not fly them." The Mustang did more than escort bombers. It choked the Luftwaffe to death. It was the turning point where US industry, engineering, and strategy combined into a single, winged answer to a desperate enemy. "You will no longer choose when we fight. We will decide." Witness the dramatic reversal of air power in World War II as the P-51 Mustang transformed the skies over Nazi Germany. In 1943, Luftwaffe pilots laughed at unescorted American B-17 bombers, confident in their ability to dominate the air. By March 1944, everything changed. With its unmatched range, laminar flow wing design, and the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Mustang escorted bombers on daring 1,100-mile missions to Berlin, shattering German confidence and control. Through first-hand accounts of German aces like Adolf Galland and Johannes Steinhoff, alongside American heroes such as Bud Anderson and Chuck Yeager, this story reveals how 15,486 Mustangs obliterated Luftwaffe resistance, achieving an unprecedented 11-to-1 kill ratio. From the skies over Black Thursday to the liberation of Europe, the Mustang showcased the power of American industrial might, technological innovation, and strategic genius, turning once mocked bombers into unstoppable forces and securing air supremacy that would change the course of the war.